Welcome to From the Nightmares of Hype Denny, and this is chapter 5 of Feral Dolls. So for this chapter I'm going to make a half fairy and a half mermaid creature. The character's design was slightly inspired from 1968 Soviet animated film The Little Mermaid, based on Hans Christian Andersen's 1837 fairy tale with the same title. I mostly took the mermaid eyes in the cartoon as inspiration for the character and the absence of soul and tragic death and the concept of being reborn as a mermaid fairy. But before I get started though, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video if you liked it of course, and comment. I love reading all your comments. With that all being said, let's get started. So this was a postponed project that I left unfinished in summer 2020. As a base I used Monster High Second Wave / Schools Out Laguna Blue. Back then I was kinda okay with her repaint, but after a year later as my skill progressed, I can see some obvious mistakes that I made. I don't know why I would do this weird blush at the edge of her forehead reroot. It kinda looked random, and also there needed to be some balance of blacks, greys and blues on her face. And back then my brush strokes were not as gentle as you can tell. Also the bodice of her dress didn't really fit her very well, it was too narrow and the patterns were inaccurate. With that being said, I'm going to undress her, disconnect her head from her neck, remove her face up with pure acetone and repaint it again, as well as restitch her bodice pieces. I protected her hair, then I sprayed her face with MSC and began repainting. As always I started with white blushing using Pan Pastel's Titanium White. As you can see I started with really soft colors, then I began slowly defining them and adding more pigment. I'm using different sizes of brushes, some of them are fine art brushes, but because the scale is too small here, most of them are either nail art brushes or makeup brushes, together with watercolor pencils. I very slowly blushed the shape of her eyebrows, and I also used pencils to define them, and then I began adding more pigments to her eyes and lips. Then I darkened her pupils and added shadows under her lashes and on her upper eyelid. Then I added some shadows under her lower eyelid. Then I took some pigment from a pencil and painted some highlights over the iris. I also drew fairy wings as well as ocean waves instead of her lashes to sort of resemble her sea butterfly nature. And then I drew her lower eyelashes. I also defined all the lines to make them look more solid and realistic. I also took some white pigment from a pencil and painted the lines on her upper eyelid. At first I wanted her lips to look more natural, but it kind of messed up her expression for me, so I painted them black. I finished her face up, removed her hair protection, then I gave her tears of camera using glossy varnish. Then I removed her factory paint of her hands using pure acetone so that the hands will look translucent. Before sanding her body, I filled those thin holes with epoxy sculpt. I kind of blended the clay with wet brush to make it smooth and seamless. And then I sanded her body with a sanding buffer. After sanding, I did a very soft body blush. I no longer do very contrast blushing because it kinda looks like raw meat. Before I began hairstyling, I did some hair doodles that you can see laid on the right upper corner of my desk. So I took some of her frontal hair and made 4 sections. 2 of them close to her ears are gonna be braids, and the 2 middle ones will be the main pigtails. I counted the number of hair plugs just so everything will be equal from each side. I sectioned and tied the braids with a thread and began braiding. I used a nail brush and wool set to make it more comfortable to work with. Then I also counted the plugs for the pigtails and tied them with elastics. The endings of the braids got some messy hair, so I just quickly cut them to make them look more neat. I also tied all the hair from the back that we are not going to use for this hairstyle. Then I took a small section of hair off of her pigtails and made second couple of braids. Once I finished those braids, I applied super glue to the tied threads to secure each section in place, and I also cut out the excess hair from the braids and applied super glue again. So these are the only braid pigtails made out of her rerouted hair. The rest of them are gonna be separate black extensions, but before adding them I took each braid that I made off of her pigtails and I kinda rolled each of them under the pigtails and glued at the top middle of her forehead. And like this, I'm also hiding the terrible reroot that had no hair part line. Then after this, I took this black nylon hair from the Doll Emporium, aka Retro Dolls UK, and I made so many braids out of them with different thickness. I don't even want to talk about how much time I spent by hand braiding each of them. So I took the thinnest braid and rolled it by half to make this water drop shape. Then I took a pin and pinned her forehead and passed that braid in and glued it in place. Then I rolled each part over her pigtail, and like this I also hid that elastic. Not only it didn't look great with a transparent elastic, but also over the time elastics rot and fall apart. So by gluing braid to hold the pigtail, I also prevent that happening in the future. I also took a thicker black braid and passed that from the inner side of the pigtails / braids. I did this not only for the sake of hairstyling, but also to hide my horrendous rerouting. Then again, I rolled it around her pigtails. I'm not really going to explain more because it's just really obvious. I didn't really plan a hairstyle specifically to look like this. I'm just going with the flow as always and letting the project to direct me. So a huge portion of her hair scalp was still visible, so in order to hide it I decided to take a black braid to make them look like or resemble ocean waves. So I kind of curved the braid to get the wave shape, then I stitched it in place. Once I finished that process, I placed that wave on her head. And I secured them in place with a broken pin using my grandfather's pliers. Those pliers are older than me, so if they seem too messy, no judgment there, okay? I also took another braid, and in order to keep her hair in place, I kinda did this X shape. Then I used pliers and super glue again. After this, I also made a smaller wave to hide the rerouted plugs, and I also decorated the wave braid with black rhinestones, which you will see later in this video. Then it was time to restitch her bodice pieces. I took my seam ripper and ripped it almost completely. I'm obviously not going to rip her skirt because I'm still happy how it turned out. I actually hand stitched this whole thing, so it was kinda harsh to rip everything apart, but it's okay. I compared each piece with the patterns that I used, and as you can tell, it's very wrong. See, this tiny inaccuracy from my previous patterns that I used caused the bodice and the sleeve to look unflattering and messy on her body. Same with back sides of the bodice pieces. So I realized that I have to cut new bodice pieces, but I decided to rip off the lace and collar ruffles from the inaccurate bodice to reuse them. Back then I also used bigger snaps, and it kinda looked bulky and gigantic for this doll scale. So I placed them with smaller ones, even though they were not very ideal size, but it's probably better now. I traced and cut out the bodice pieces, and as always I'm using Delightful's patterns. I burned their edges off camera, then I hand stitched all the pieces together, and I also added the sleeves. I removed the lace from the front of her bodice piece, then I restitched it on her newer one. I used tiny bit of super glue with a pen to keep it in place, so that I won't have to use gigantic pens. Also, don't go bananas with super glue while you do this, cause it will make the fabric stone hard and the needle will no longer go through it. Then I hand stitched the lace. Then I also stitched the edges of her bodice as well as the sleeves. Then I cut her sleeves cause they were too long. I also cut off the excess allowance. Then I flipped it inside out, and now we finally have an accurate bodice. I folded the collar of the bodice, then I stitched the ruffles in place. I also made ruffles with pleats for her cuffs. You can do this in a very easy way with a basting stitch, but I really wanted equal sized pleats. Then I stitched the endings of these pleats together to make the cuffs. I took my X-Acto knife, passed it through the sleeve to be able to attach the ruffles. Then I attached the bodice piece to the skirt, and I also replaced the snap closures with the smaller ones. Then I also hand stitched beads and glued some rhinestones on her dress, so that it will look a bit more detailed and magical. And in here I also pricked my finger, which is fine, I mean I'm used to it at this point. I really wanted to make Victorian/Edwardian-esque bloomers for her, so I used the pattern for the pants that I made for my custom clothed doll. Kind of changed the pattern to go wider like a pyramid so that I will gather the edges to get that puffiness. But the problem was that it didn't fit very well to a female Monster High doll, so I restitched around her whiskey parts and did some adjustments so that it will finally start to fit her. I again did pleats instead of a basting stitch because I don't know why I like to overcomplicate everything. But from her waistline I did a basting stitch. I also attached ruffles and lace, added sequins, thanks for that wood by the way, as well as snaps and 2 rainstones to imitate buttons of some kind. Then I made stockings for her. I already showed the work in progress for this in previous chapters, so I don't feel like describing everything again. I just used my sewing machine this time to stitch the edges, and I also cut out the extra allowance so that they won't look bulky on her legs. Then I flipped them inside out and tried them on, and they fit very well, so I also stitched lace to them and began making the umbrella. I cut out shrubs from Warbler and glued them together to make an octagon polygon. Then with my fingers I curved each shrub. You don't need heat to do this, cause once you heat them and pull they will basically melt. I don't really think that you should take this process of making an umbrella very seriously, cause as an overcomplicator from nature I made this in a difficult way. I'm pretty sure there are more talented people on YouTube that did this more oversimplified than me. So with that being said, I measured the distance between each shrub/umbrella rib and cut out the arc that will hold each shrub in place. So because the shrubs were kinda sandwiched on one another, they were all on an individual highness, so I decided to cut off their central connecting piece and re-glue them together on the same level. Then I cut out each panel from this sheet organizer. I mean the paper organizer that I used to carry my diploma thesis, because my theses are already in a garbage can, but I would not recommend you to use a glossy finish material for the panels, because of that glossiness it was a hell to glue them in place. But before gluing them I spray painted the ribs blue. And for the panels I used silicone glue cause super glue didn't work with this material. I cut off the excess plastic, and after this the skin from my fingers decided to socially distance itself from my body. It just decided to shed. I don't know what was going on. But at some places I still tried to use super glue, and after holding it for a while it finally stuck to the surface. I also decided to add fabric to the panels using tacky glue this time. I also made pleated ruffles to decorate the umbrella to make it more vintage looking. I kinda stretch each of them from the middle to glue it with a curve. Then I also added the second ruffle. I glued lace to the ruffles, and I also made braids out of 2 black and 1 single blue ribbon to have an interesting texture. Then I glued them to the other side of the ribs. Then I also glued this lace to the canopy, or whatever you call it in English. Then I also cut out octagram shaped star to make the end top. I also made another one to glue from the inner side. In order to get the shape I just cut it a few times with a razor blade, not to the point to cut but to fold each triangle point. Then I painted them black and added glossy varnish. Then I took a barbecue stick and made another braid from ribbons and rubbed the braid all over it to give it a knee set effect. Then I passed it through each octagram and glued them in place. I also painted the tip of the barbecue stick with blue paint. And this is how it looked. But I also wanted to imitate raindrops leaking from her umbrella, so I made those beads. I made 8 of them and attached to the tip of the umbrella of camera. Then I designed and drew her bag/fairy coffin template. The lid obviously needs to be slightly bigger than the box. I traced it on Worbla and cut it out. If you bought a doll from me in 2020, you received your doll in a fairy coffin. I will no longer make them because I spent so much time and material making them that I burned out. But I mean, if a client would ever really want me to make one again, I might do. But as a reference to the fairy coffin, I decided to make this bag for her. Again, I scrapped the sides to fold them, then I glued each corner together. Then I made those tiny fairy wing skeleton and folded them in this fairy film leftovers. I ironed them down, cut the axes, burned the edges, and began making the fairy child. Now at this point I was experiencing total burnout and my feelings were kind of mixed. I began overthinking the entire process, and even though I finished making the fairy child, I decided not to include him in the final doll. Even though the entire meaning and message was based around this fairy child, I decided not to include him. I really thought that some of you will probably drag me for putting this little fairy in a coffin-shaped box, and I've been overthinking so much in my head, and even though hand sculpting in such a tiny scale took absolutely forever, I still decided not to include him. My concepts are obscure and I can be harsh sometimes when I want to send you the message, but at the same time I really don't want to trigger you. But other than that, if you are wondering about the materials, I used polymer clay, baked it in the oven, then I added Worbla straps to imitate seaweed in an Art Nouveau style, then I sprayed it with MSC and blushed the body with pastels. Now I spray painted the bag blue, then I added glossy varnish to it and I glued this sprayed ribbon to its edges. Then I also glued blue rhinestones and also to attach lace. And to hide the ribbon cut, I attached this lace flower. I glued the wings inside the bag, and then I also added rhinestones to the lace. I also glued this black braid to the back edges of the box. By the way, this braid was one of the leftover ones from her nylon hair. Nylon is also plastic, so it fits here. I also attached this bead handle so that the bag will be hanging from her shoulder. For her wings I used this purple flash Angelina film and this blue wire notion thing. I also sketched the shape of the wings that I wanted to make. I decided to simplify the design by removing some of the upper and lower parts of the wings. Then when I tried to make the wing copers with this wire, I realized that it just doesn't really hold the pose because it's too thin and fragile. So I decided to use the leftover golden wires, but in the end I will just spray them blue. I finished making one of the wing skeletons, then I used it to make the other one. I used some super glue with a fixation spray to glue all the wires together. After spray paint dried, I folded them with Angelina film, used super glue to secure the film in place. Then I ironed them down. After the iron had cut out the excess film, then I burned the edges with a candle. Now I always wondered how to burn the edges with a deeper and smaller angle, and I figured it out. Look, I took my razor blade, warmed it up with a candle, then I pushed the film with it and it burned, and like this, I no longer risk to overburn the film. I also keep the blade pushed for a while, then removed it so that I won't get plastic hair splits like with silicone glue. Time for the shoes. First I made these regular ballerinas. I also burnt my finger in here once again, and then I drew and cut out these triangles from Warbler for her shoes. I bought one of these fake monster idols when I've just started this hobby, and these hands were in my stock for 3 years now, so I'm going to add them to her shoes to imitate as if people are drowning under her feet. I obviously didn't want it to seem like as if the hands are holding these shoes, so I used my pens to keep the shoes in the air above the hands. Kailani, the character, has 3 forms: her human form, witch form, and the mermaid form. I'm also planning to make her complete mermaid form in the future, but with these shoes I'm going to imitate her transformation sequence, like how her feet are turning into a mermaid tail. So in order to do that, I cut out straps from Warbler, then I sketched the mermaid tail and used the straps to create the silhouette. This would not be me if I didn't try this on her hands, and this gave me a really cool idea. I can actually make magic spells on my doll hands. So I cut off the hand nibs, but then I decided that they are too high, so I also cut off her hands as well. Then I glued everything in place. I also wanted to imitate water leaking / splashing from her shoes as she transforms, so I glued more straps to the shoes. Unfortunately, I tried them on her feet with stockings and they didn't fit, and I don't know why I made the same mistake again. So in conclusion, if you are going to make stockings with shoes, sculpt the shoes with the stockings on doll feet so that it will fit once it's done. After resculpting the shoes, I glued them in again, then I spray painted the shoes blue, and this is how they looked. Now I have been thinking, how am I going to imitate the water splash, and decided to use sequins for it, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find sequins that small at our local stores. But as I was looking, I found these flowers and they were just ideal. I bought them and cut all the petals and they literally look like water drops. Or maybe fish scales, I don't know. So I glued them all over the straps, and again, I don't want to talk how much time I spent on this. In the end, I also added beads to her shoes and they were finally done. I quickly dressed up the doll, and after all this work, she was finally done. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to hit the like button, and if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe for the upcoming projects. Also, shout out to my amazing Patreons for supporting my art all this time, and if you would want to join us, the link is under this video description. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and now enjoy the end result pictures, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.